We are joined today by Councilmember Dennis Zine and Wendy Gruhl. This is the Audits and Governmental Efficiency Committee meeting. We have 7 items before us today, and if there's no objection, okay. If there's no objection, we will call items 1 through 6. We'll note and file those items and put them on the consent calendar. Ms.
Are you going to start consent, you say?
Yeah.
So we're going to just do number 7?
We will just do number 7.
Wait, this is on this binder, item 1.
Mr. Zine, do you need a moment to look at those and
No, I
see
have
if...
this whole big binder on item number 1. I didn't know we were going to have a debate on number 1 or not, or discussion.
You might just want to start with 7 and then come back to the other ones.
We're also waiting for the CAO. He's on his way up. So if you want to discuss number 1, we could do that, Mr. Zine?
No, I just had this whole big folder on 1, a separate binder. So I thought it was something, but if it's annual financial report,
This one was for 2006-07.
and now we're in 8.
8-9.
So I think all this work
Required.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, so we'll note and file those items, and
Number 7.
number 1 through 6. And will the legislative assistant take us... Thank you all for coming. We appreciate your...
They appreciated that.
You're not interested in number 7? No, none of you? Don't want to see how your tax dollars are spent? And whether they're being spent appropriately? No? Nobody's concerned?
Our controller's been busy if you look at this agenda.
Okay, item number 7 is a motion from Council Members Huizar and Gruel for the Controller and City Administrative Officer to report relative to the review of trash fee revenues as they relate to funding the city's public safety programs, which includes the hiring of 1,000 additional police officers. This item is also referred to the Public Safety Committee and Budget and Finance Committee.
Thank you very much. If we could have the controller present her item, and thank you, Ms. Chick, for being here today. And afterwards, we'll hear from the CAO, and I understand we have some representatives from the police department here as well. So welcome, Ms. Chick.
Okay,
I think this is
thank
twice in
you.
a row that we have the pleasure of your company in this committee.
Thank you. I know, it's been fun coming here. Thank you. But I do want to thank you, Chairman Huizar, for your leadership on the committee and for bringing my July 8th report in so quickly to committee, so thank you. I think all members of this committee, I know, agree with me that transparency and openness in government is so incredibly important in earning the public's trust. In May 2006, when the mayor announced a plan for cost recovery trash collection fee, I stood at his side. And at that time, he made clear that the money that was going to be freed up in the general fund by the trash fee was going to be dedicated solely to new police hires. And I, at the time, promised to report back to the public on how the money was spent. A lot has happened in the past 2 years since that trash fee was proposed and adopted. I think, first of all, I need to point out that the council's motion, that was the enabling motion to take the money in, specifically states that the general fund money that was to be freed up by the trash fee coming in was to be used for, quote, public safety and for hiring 1,000 additional officers. So I think in retrospect, it's safe to say that the public in general and through the media coverage had the impression that the dollars that we were going to now have available in the general fund were going to be dedicated solely to new officers. Secondly, it's been a frustrating and daunting experience to get clarity and direction from both the mayor and the CAO's office. It's been an interesting experience because in the end I came out with a very brief report that basically says we got this much money in, we hired this many additional police officers, and the rest all has gone to the increase in the general fund budget of LAPD. It just seemed so simple. I should have been able to come out with the report much sooner. But there was quite a bit of confusion in the last year of the numbers changing that I was getting, and also the methodology. I mean, quite frankly, the discussion was, so what are we saying that these additional general fund monies are now covering? But again, the council motion very specifically stated that the monies were for generalized public safety purposes. So the report comes back and says, after 2 years since the initiation of the fee, or almost 2 years, we've collected about $137 million in the trash fee. In the same period, 366 additional police officers were hired, and that used up about $47 million of the $137 million. The remaining dollars, about $89.4 million, have been absorbed into a variety of increases into LAPD's budget. The report says that the money in the general fund that was released by having the trash fee pay for trash collection has been more than absorbed by the increased budget of LAPD and meets the council's general intent of public safety purposes. And the report comments on the importance of always trying to paint the most accurate picture for the public so we all have realistic expectations.
Thank you, Ms. Controller. And so the purpose of us passing or our commitment to the voters was to free up money from the general fund to increase public safety, so very broad category.
Exactly.
Sometimes there were statements made that it was solely to hire new officers. And as you stated, some of that money has gone to various objectives in LAPD. So to some extent, we've kept our word that it does go to public safety.
The council was very clear.
Not counting the times that it said very specifically that we're going to solely hire officers. But the concern is, where or how is this money being spent in the LAPD? Now, were you able to get the clarification as to how it was spent and where the additional $89.4 million?
I think we're going to need the CAO up here to discuss that, and maybe LAPD. Really, basically, we just looked at, it's increased by this many millions of dollars, and it's a bigger increase than what's come in from the trash fee, and therefore, we can say that the money's gone there. I mean, you could also say some of the money went there, some of the money went to the fire department. Some of, I mean, public safety purposes can be building and safety, it can be fire department, police department, animal services. We use the methodology that the mayor's office and the CAO gave us, and they said that all of the money freed up was the money that went to LAPD. I mean, we know that one of the big increases was to absorb the wage and benefit package that was negotiated. That in and of itself increased LAPD's budget, I'm forgetting the number, 20-some odd million, I forget.
Okay.
But, so some of it was salary increases. And by the way, when we looked at the costs of hiring police, we looked at all of the related costs, from the personnel department, publicity, outreach, training, equipment, all of the costs that go into hiring a new officer.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Zine, and then Ms. Gruhl.
I got a couple questions regarding our civilian population within the police department. They're down like 650 positions. When you look at that $89.4 million, could we determine if any of it was designated to fill some of those civilian positions? Because I know in your previous report,
Right.
they're putting officers where they should put civilians, put the officers in the street. Can we find out if any of those, because I understand there's still about 650 positions vacant in civilian, and that's a lot of money that could have been appropriated for some of those to at least cut that number down.
And again, I don't, and I'd be very eager to have fire department or, police department or the CAO come and discuss that.
Is someone here
But,
from the police
I mean,
department?
I'd like to know the answer also, but I don't think that there's been any specific plan or effort to do any of the civilianization piece. And the vacancies you're talking about are positions that are already designated civilian. And I don't know if any of that additional money went towards addressing that problem.
Because it had to be, it couldn't have covered, that type of money, I don't think would cover the salary and benefit package. It had to be.
Oh, no, it did more than just do that.
Yeah.
And I know, appreciate your report, Ms. Chick, because we get asked this question a lot as elected officials.
Right.
Did the, and we were very clear. I think you're right on the transparency was so important. And as it came to the budget committee, and we debated it long and hard, I actually came up with that language in cooperation with the CLA and Mr. Park's office. But for me, it was very important that it strictly say that our priority number one is for LAPD, for public safety, because we were making it very clear that the trash, what we were doing was saying we were no longer going to subsidize trash, and so therefore we were going to have more money in the general fund because we were going to be subsidizing, and that the number one priority should be public safety. Because there was deep concern by all of us and the public at large, was that money going to really be used for the purposes we said it was going to be used? And we did debate about what that public safety meant, because we understood, and I know you were chair of public safety, right, for a period of time in your council tenure, was public safety. We knew we couldn't hire enough officers in that first year to get to 10,000, and that there was attrition, and you had to be able to figure that out, and you had to compete, which we consistently compete with surrounding cities who were raising the salaries, giving, drop and bounce and all kinds of things that they had. I don't know where they come up with these names. Yeah, drop and bounce.
There's drop, I'm not sure it's bounce.
Yeah, bounce is a
That's
new
a new
one.
one,
Yeah, it's a
bounce.
new one.
Really?
It's a
Whoa.
new one.
Next will be
but-
boomerang.
So the whole, and the fact is that we knew that we knew that overtime was a tool in the toolbox to also have more officers on the street, because we were trying to also describe to the community at large that you could have 10,000 officers, but if they're not on the street, there was a big difference too. And so we counted in overtime as part of that. If we had more officers on the street than we had the year before, that also. And I think what your document pointed out, which the CAO and I had a chance to talk about, was a methodology that determined accountability to what our original goal was. Because right now, the only methodology we have is how much did you receive, how much was spent, and where did it go? And the vagueness of public safety is kind of concerning. So I think one of the things, Mr. Chair, that we would want to look at is going forward is the methodology as how do we determine our effectiveness in meeting the original goal in our financial policies, which we clearly put in there, and the motion that was adopted as part of the budget that said public safety was our number one. Because I think that we recognized overtime was a piece of that until we got to 10,000. The whole idea is hopefully when we get to 10,000, we won't have as much overtime. That's the goal. This year we made a big step of our budget is X amount for overtime. You've asked for it every year. We're going to give it to you. You got to stay within it. But I think those are the kind of conversations we're going to have as we get to a 10,000 number in the budget. How do we deal with overtime? But I think there was always a recognition, as you alluded to, that it would be more than just the 300 and whatever number you gave of new officers, that until we reach that point, but there were expenditures that would reflect that. But I think without knowing what that 89 million, and that may be another, Mr. Zine alluded to as well, is to ask for a report back as to exactly how that money was spent, so that the public, understands that. I mean, that's really the biggest issue. I didn't, people aren't happy that the trash fees went up, but it's just like a bond measure or something else. People want to know that it's
What the
going for
money's
the purposes in which you either voted for it at the ballot box or we voted as a council to do something specifically.
And I think going forward, and I'm hoping Mr. Serrano agrees, that we could bore down more into the LAPD dollars to answer the questions, how much on overtime? What about civilian employees, which certainly free up officer time and that kind of thing?
And so you think you two could work on a offices work on a methodology that would come to the council and say, this is how we think we're going to go forward. So everyone will know exactly how we're going to judge our success or failure on what we'd originally proposed in 2000 and whatever year that was.
And then the second trash increase that took effect, that's not earmarked for any public safety, as I understand. The full cost recovery. That's just general fund.
I think the discussion this past year is when the budget was adopted, basically the trash fee money would go and pay for the solid waste program, and thus any other money that were freed up could be funneled into the public safety, and that's essentially is thank you. The police department.
That's the full cost recovery.
That's correct.
Also, the issue on drop and bounce. Drop is when you have that 5-year and then you would retire. Well, bounce is when they can bring you back. So you drop out and bounce back. So that's why I call it bounce.
That's why I'm calling it boomerang.
Yeah, boomerang.
Boomerang is the same kind of thing. So anyway, it's relatively new, but the bounce. The other question I have is on the deployment. When you look at 363 new officers, I know there's been retirements, et cetera. When you look at the deployment throughout the city, you don't see a very visible black and white force, uniformed forces on the street. When you look at 366, is that over and above what is left through retirements? So we're
It's a net gain.
is
That's a net gain.
So we're over 9,000 something right now. The other question is, I and many people don't see that presence on the street. Where are they? I know the department has their deployment formulas, but when you try to find the black and whites driving down the street, they're not there. So I don't know where they are, but the question always comes back. We've got 2 new stations opening, Topanga and Olympic. They've got to put personnel in there. Where they're going to get the personnel from is a serious question, because it's going to take more than 366 to fill 2 stations. Maybe you have, I know the controller has done the audit, but maybe you have some answers to those.
I think a lot of the questions that you're raising are certainly ones that need to be addressed by the police department. Obviously, you bring up some very good points. I mean, there's only a net amount of growth that's achievable, and as we go forward, and certainly with those new stations opening up in this coming year, what it does to the overall, what I'll say, pool of resources, how they get redeployed in order to staff those stations. That would be a good question.
That's a concern I have. If they take from North Hollywood and put them into Topanga, and take from Central and put them into Olympic, and take from Rampart, if they swap them around, your gain is going to be 0. All you're going to do is be shuffling around. They need to actually have probably 500 minimum additional officers for those 2 stations, maybe 250 each station. That's uniformed detectives, command staff. Without that, all you're going to be doing is robbing Peter to pay Paul. And we're not going to accomplish anything, because your detectives are still going to be spread thin. The civilian population, which you need to run those stations also, won't be there. So that's another equation that we have to consider. Taking them out of North Hollywood and then putting up in Topanga, or taking them out of Van Nuys or the Valley stations, that doesn't gain us anything. Now you have less deployment in those areas where they need them, and they're already desperate for more. So we're supposed to open these things in January. My question is, where are the bodies coming from to put in there, unless you start peeling off of your existing force citywide? So from Harbor, they'll go to Olympic. From Northeast, they'll go to the Valley. Shuffling the deck still gives you 52 cards. We need a few more decks.
Yes, we do, and I think sort of in response to that, certainly, it's the mayor's goal as well as the council's to continue the hiring. And while, like you said, it's going to be a mix of sort of shuffling resources around, the hiring is going to continue, and as we can bring more officers in, then instead it won't be all this pulling from the different stations to sort of keep the resources, for those 2 stations at 100%. So it's
Just remember that
as we continue to grow, it will sort of
when they graduate from the
reshuffle.
academy, they need to be trained for a long period of time. So there's a training officer, a P3, a senior lead. And then you've got detectives that have to funnel the cases through the court system. So as you make promotions to make detectives, now you're taking more people out of the field that could be training officers. I mean, unless we get the bodies, in other words, that 1 deck of cards is not going to cover 2 stations in our existing lack of deployment. And I know there is a possibility of a delay in opening, which I don't think we should do, just because we don't have the personnel. But you can't take those new bodies and say, okay, you're in Topanga, and you've got officers without training officers. and you need detectives to follow up. So that it's a cascading effect.
I remember a discussion like this a long time ago on council, and looking at opening, I guess was the 19th station,
Mission
right?
Station.
Yeah. It would seem to me that LAPD would have already worked out, one would think, a staffing proposal that shows how they do that, that would be very interesting for this committee and others to contemplate, because it's about civilians and it's about sworn. How does that impact the overall goal of adding more police officers? I mean, you're laying out some really good logistical issues, and I'm always looking for an opening, to plug moving one of my audits forward. The police civilianization audit, which I think you all know, really hit a roadblock in this fiscal year because there was a will, understandably, to add more sworn and no more money to go around to start hiring and training the civilians to go behind the sworn that we were saying that the audit identified could go out in the street. But it's absolutely a faster and slightly less expensive way to get officers on the street, and might really make sense to look at doing pieces of it going forward, starting in the next fiscal year. In addition to, or as part of, the sworn personnel expansion.
Because your record rooms, for example, the record rooms have to have civilian staff in to process the documents. If they're 650 short, are they going to take them out of Van Nuys and put them in there, then Van Nuys? I mean, it's with the expansion of the department, additional stations is a great idea, but again, you need to have personnel, and the critical aspect of civilians would sometimes get shortchanged and they're pushed aside. You're not going to put officers in there processing crime reports. That's one of the issues, is how is that staffing set to begin? Where you keep the bodies?
And you're talking about the 650 vacant positions, and the audit identified, I think it was 500 and some odd positions that could be civilianized in addition to the 650 vacant. So,
1,100.
Which puts more uniforms on the street and more detectives in the stations processing the reports. So the bodies are there.
it's a win to do it.
Exactly.
For the CAO, any general comments on this report that you'd like to share with the committee?
Well, I think a lot of things have been discussed thus far. The point here is basically, it's been the goals to sort of expand public safety, get more officers on the street, expand the force, and then certainly I think we've really achieved some milestones over the last couple of years with our hiring plan, and certainly as we go forward, I think we're in a good position to sort of keep crimes down, get increased officer presence, and certainly I think as has been brought out many times in a couple of the audits, that certainly we want to pursue some civilization of the department. And there's lots of opportunities there, and we like to move forward on some of those. So.
Yeah, do we have a good accounting of how we spent the $89.4 million were spent?
As far as
Those were the additional funds not used for hiring the 366 officers.
certainly, I mean, it's you have the direct costs that you can associate with an officer, and it's we've had a figure of roughly $100,000 more or less, and for the direct costs, and that includes sort of the retirement piece, the health piece, but certainly it's not just that body, that officer. It is the vehicle. It's the training. It's all the advertising, the background check. Everything goes to support the overall buildup. I mean,
that's
it's
greater
become the
That's
organizational
greater.
structure.
She said she counted that. That was greater than the 100,000. I don't know what your total was for each
I think
officer.
what you're asking about is the 89 million that went to grow the police department's budget.
Where did
Yes,
that go?
well, where did that go?
That's-
That's the question.
Where did that go?
I mean, that's essentially is in the department. It's to provide the cost of living increases for the existing officers. It is to provide, the vehicles and other things, other organization changes that have happened in PD to support the overall buildup.
I
But we
think
get-
would it be...
Is
I think-
LAPD
And-
Breakdown of that?
I think that's
and
what we
we
want is
can-
really
we can
to
do
say,
that.
what was the 89 million, and not questioning whether or not it was spent correctly. I don't think
Yeah.
that what Ms. Chick is saying, is it really is just let us know here's how much went for cost of living, here's how much went for overtime, here's how much went for vehicles or things that were not.
And in terms of
and we can do that.
oversight, one of the reasons I like to see that, not only as an audits chair, but, as a council member and member of the budget committee, is as we ramp up in more officers, that $89 million could be less and less each year, so that eventually, I'm predicting that it's going to cost us more than the $137 million we've realized already for the 1,000 officers. So there's going to be less and less of that money. I want to make sure we're not investing that money in ongoing costs, so that they're going to come back and tell us, well, look, we've invested in this, we need to keep, so this is one-time money they're getting until we realize a full 1,000 officers. So I think we need to see that as an oversight body, to have that discussion with LAPD, so to say, hey, look, we're giving you this money now, but it might not be there in the future years, so just be aware of that. And the sooner we do that, I think the better we'll.
And I think we can do that. I mean, we brought up the COLAs, the officers, the overtime. I mean, the new stations, certainly there's a cost to that. And some of this, some of the DNA resources too, that have been provided. So we can provide some detail.
The other would be as if attrition hasn't drop and bounce, and maybe boomerang soon in the future. It has that, those are more costly officers if they stay longer. The good news is they stay longer and they're experienced, but they're much more expensive and higher paid than the newbies coming in. And if, in fact, we've had attrition, we've had higher costs, and that would also be an interesting number to know from LAPD.
And with the initial 2 years ago, that increase for trash, does that stay in that public safety fund, or that, well, I know it's not directly related to that, now there's full cost recovery, is it all going to end up merging into the general fund where we won't have, once we get to 10,000, we won't have the separate earmark, it'll be get what we can get? Or is there going to be a special appropriation, which I know we can't have special appropriation out of that initial increase in the fee, but what we said is that money would be used, free up general fund money for public safety.
Yes.
Are we going to continue on that trend, or is it then going to evaporate after the 10,000 and then all be part of the general fund, and then everybody sees what they can get?
Well, I think, just as you mentioned, basically whatever general fund dollars have been freed up for public safety, that will continue to be there. I don't see any changes.
But we got 137 million that was freed up, which went 47.2 and then 89.4.
And that's going to grow.
And certainly the general fund dollars that have freed up, that will continue to support the buildup, the officers.
What happens when we get to 10,000? Does that then cease? Or they'll go to another level, or is it, that was the commitment?
I think the mayor's goal is to hire 1,000 new officers, which would take us over the 10,000.
Okay, so once we get the 1,000 additional officers, then what? We revert back?
I don't think that's the goal, to revert back at all.
The trash fee has to still be, the increase, the fact that we no longer subsidize the trash and the money we get has to continue to support those officers. It continues, and the growth, at least, again, this is what we need to know, is in the growth patterns over that period of time, is we knew some was overtime, some were other things. So when you start going this way, overtime is going to be reduced, hopefully, and there are going to be more officers on the street. So but it still is going to be over probably whatever increase we had, we will not be able to cover, and it's going to have to look at other general fund.
Now we're hearing from the expert.
Oh, gee, thank you very much. Pete Echevarria from the City Attorney's Office. What we have is the reality that the general fund dollars that are freed up are fungible dollars. They can't, and we had this discussion at the time that the council took the action, they can't be set up as a special fund, as you mentioned, right, or a special appropriation. But part of the discussion that we had at that time was that the council, because of its power over the budget and control over the budget, will see on a year-to-year basis, and even more frequently, the expenditures that are being made for police, and will be able directly to get that assurance on an ongoing basis by that information that's provided each year through the budget process and from the CAO, that the expenditures are being maintained. What we're talking about is a growth in the absolute amount of that fungible money that's in the general fund that will continue. And how you spend it is in your control, and it's
right,
within your policy decisions that you make. That was a policy decision that you made, that you would take an identified growth in the general fund and utilize it for public safety. I think there was an acknowledgement that ramping up in hiring wasn't going to occur from one day to the next. It was going to take some time. So
Right.
public safety was the focus rather than all that money would be used for hiring, with the idea that the hiring would occur over time. Once that hiring takes place and you get to a level that, at least for that time being, you find acceptable, that's an ongoing obligation. And the growth of the fund that has
It's gonna help
occurred will
cover
be
that.
there from year to year as well, to continue to fund that obligation. And I'll just make one other observation, if I may. There are underlying issues with 218, and when we talk about a methodology to track the costs and so on, and so we'll work with the CAO and with the controller to make sure that whatever methodology is proposed will withstand a 218 type analysis.
Well, the
Just
fact
wanna make
is,
sure.
if we spent $89 million, there should be an accounting somewhere.
Right.
Oh,
that-
absolutely.
Yeah, because I think really the question is, how do you account for $89 million more of general fund money that went to LAPD? And it doesn't even need to be connected to what money freed that money up to allow it to be spent to begin with.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
At this time, if I could ask representatives from the LAPD to please come up, and some of the committee members may have some questions for them.
You see the commander hiding there in the corner? The last row, the last seat.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Jacob. Thank you for this report. Well, welcome, and you've heard the discussion. Several questions have been asked. Any general comments on the report?
No, why don't you go with
Okay.
the deployment?
My name is Jim Castle. I'm the Commanding Officer of Personnel Group. First, I'll talk about the hiring, and then I'll talk about the plan with the new stations. To date, fiscal year to date, from starting in 0506, 0607, and 0708, we have a net hire of 520 officers. We're planning to hire 780 officers in 0809, and 780 officers in 09-010. If attrition keeps at what we expect in those two fiscal years, we should reach our goal in the latter part of fiscal year 09-010 of reaching 1,000 hires, net 1,000 hires. With respect to the new stations, there has been a plan. There is a plan that's across the street at the CAO's office. Unfortunately, I don't know the intimate details about how many civilians we're hiring, but there is a plan across the street that Office of Operations, worked on, along with Personnel Division, on how many civilians to staff the records unit, how many officers to staff the desks, the detectives, patrol, et cetera. And we're working now with the CAO's office in dealing with unfreezes and advertisements, so there is a plan. I just don't know the specifics of it. But there is going to be a little bit of adjusting, moving people out of certain stations, because Topanga, for instance, took up a lot of Devonshire and West Valley's area, so some of those people will be moved over into those divisions, over into Topanga. The same with Olympic. So it'll be a little bit of movement of personnel, but as we continue to increase personnel, additional promotions can be made, so we can have the staffing not only at the command level, but at the rank and file at lieutenant and below.
Can I interject?
Yeah.
I think Laura Filatov, Fiscal Operations, LAPD, I think you recall during the budget discussions that there were a number of fixed post positions that those were going to be the new authorities that we were going to need, both sworn and civilian, for the two new stations. So there's going to be a number of, as you know, we need new captains, we need new watch commanders, we need new detectives to handle the various desks, all that sort of thing. Those are the fixed post positions. The positions that'll be reassigned from within the department are basically the patrol, because they're going to be reconfiguring the boundaries for the new stations. And So that's the plan. So when you talk about additional staffing for those new stations, yes, there are going to be additional people that are going to be added to it. It's not like you're going to just spread everybody, so thin that they can't be effective. And also, there's going to be a number of new civilian positions that you need in those stations that are going to be, new coming into the department. And right now, they've already started the process. We got funding for, I think it was 9 months, right? 9 months, sufficient salary funds for 9 months worth of salaries, which we use as an average salary to be able to fill to be able to staff the stations. And what's at the CAO right now is the unfreeze to be able to, to fill those positions.
So the department has those funds for the sworn and civilian for
Yes.
9 months?
We have the funds, but we don't, right now, it's part of the council's freeze, as part of the budget process. We need to get those positions unfrozen. We were given the incremental funds, but we need to be, you can't have everybody start January 1 when the station opens. You need to get people in there to get things set up. You need to establish, the sworn that work the various desks, and the captains and all. They have to establish their links with the community and all those kinds of things. There's a lot of work that goes into opening up a new station, and it takes, when they opened up the Mission Station, I think that they estimated it took about 11 months to do all the work, and we've transitioned people in. You don't need all those people 11 months out. You need a small group, and then it incrementally increases.
But in the way we did it in the budget process was, we now know certain dates, and
Yeah.
you're saying we have to take another action other than that to do personnel action?
We have to get those positions unfrozen.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's at the
But that
CAO.
wasn't, okay. That's
Yeah.
in the CAO's office, because I thought during the budget process, we knew exactly when and how much money, and that
Right.
positions would start at certain points. So
Right.
if there's any holdup, I thought we'd already done that in the budget process.
Okay.
What does it take to run a station? How many personnel detectives and sworn and command staff? I know you were at West Valley,
Yeah.
Commander. Approximately
Approximately 300.
Approximately 300?
Approximately 300.
Okay.
But as you know, some divisions can be 450, 500, and others 325.
Okay. So a minimum of 3, you would say, from the captain on down to run the operation?
Maybe
Somewhere in that vicinity.
somewhere in that.
Okay. I'm just trying to get a gauge of it.
No, I understand.
And, but the estimates you gave us, so by when do you think we'd have the additional 1,000 new officers? And by when will we reach our goal of 10,000 officers? That's 2 separate timelines, correct?
Right. No, by the time we reach the 1,000 officers, it'll be the latter part of fiscal year 09, 010. We're looking for like April, May,
Okay. 09, sometime.
fiscal year 09, 010. And at that time, we will have the 1,000 officers, and we should have a little over 10,000.
Okay. And one thing, I keep saying 010 myself, but it's really 10.
Yeah.
09, 10.
Oh.
My staff corrected me on that when I was mentioning that over and over myself, so. Okay, so that's something we need to clear up. I've asked all my questions, but we do have some direction, I think, to the CAO and a request to the Controller's Office if she could work with the CAO to come up with a methodology. Can you articulate that, Ms.
Yes,
Brewer?
and I think with the city attorney's office as well,
The
as
city attorney's
Pete
office,
mentioned, which is to come back, and this would involve LAPD as well. I think there's 2 parts of it. One is, what's the methodology where we will judge our financial policies that say public safety is number 1, and that the funds that are now freed up will be used for public safety, and to get from LAPD and CAO exactly, here's how much we know we did to hire additional officers, here's how much we used to have overtime, here's how much we did for being competitive, and really have a clear picture, and be able to say next year, when we assume X amount we're no longer subsidizing by the city of Los Angeles, how much is that, how many people are we hiring, and where's the money going?
And the other thing we need is an accounting from the CAO on the $89.4 million, how those dollars were spent. We will need that information as well.
We'll get you all that information. We'll break it down.
Okay,
by
great.
detail.
Bounce it back.
So should we, colleagues, note and file this report, or should we
Maybe we should hold it and ask
hold
for
it
a
until we
report
get
back,
that information, and then we'll get another update on this?
I think
Eric Sanjurjo, City 14, I think we actually did commit that we would forward it to the next two policy committees.
Okay.
But they did give us.
Would this go
chances
to
tell us
council at some point?
It was referred to Public Safety and Budget and Finance.
And after budget, if I go to council, so we could get those reports before, we'll forward it to the other committees, but if we could get those before council, otherwise we'll bring it back to this committee before then, so.
I think that's a good action, because otherwise there'd be a lot of questions City Council we can't answer, and it'd be better to have those answers before it goes to the
Yeah,
full
yeah,
council.
okay.
We'll get you that information.
Great, thank you very much.
So move it forward to the next two committees.
Yes, thank you. And clerk, I think that is all the items on today's agenda. This
Yep.
meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.